All right, good evening, everybody. This is Tammy Lemmer, President of the Haslett Board of Education, and I'm going to call this evening's Board of Education meeting to order. And I'll start by leading the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. That went about as well as the rendition of Happy Birthday that was on a call from earlier today. Because we don't have a group shot, I am just going to call the roll call to confirm the board members who are present. Ms. East?
Here.
Ms. Collins, have you arrived?
Yes, I'm
Great,
here.
thank you. Ms. Polverento?
Here.
Mr. Morey?
Here.
Mr. Mashad?
Here.
And Ms. Wheeler?
Here.
Great, thank you. And looks like we just have staff members on. I'm seeing Rick Jensen, Brandy Butcher, Steve Cook, and Michelle Gustafson. Have I missed anyone else?
Jeff.
Oh, Jeff, sorry, yes. Running the show. All right, well, let's, Madam Secretary, do we have any correspondence to report?
No correspondence.
Okay, and no members of the public that I can see. So we will move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, President Lemmer. I just have a couple things this evening. First and foremost, construction update. We are still planning to move forward as scheduled. There are 2 contracts that are yet to be approved by the board. Those were going to be approved later in the agenda, but that would complete all the contracts for the work to begin this summer. The only caveat is what's going to happen with the stay-at-home order. As we all know, the governor has extended that through the end of April. So we're anxiously waiting to see what's going to happen after that date. If we have to make some alterations to our construction schedule for the summer, we will do that, but we're going to wait and see what happens with that order and what's going to look like for May and for June. So we're planning on moving forward. We're on hold at this point until we can figure out what's going to happen with the state in terms of allowing workers to work and move forward with construction. And as I mentioned, we have 1 approval item later in the agenda for the final 2 construction contracts to be approved by the board. And then the next item is a kindergarten roundup. With the stay-at-home order in place, we have postponed kindergarten roundup, both the parent meeting scheduled for April 21st and the kindergarten roundup that was scheduled for April 23rd and 24th. I'm currently working with Principal Frias at Wilkshire to come up with an alternative schedule. When we know more what's going to happen in May, we could potentially see a rescheduling in May or sometime in June or over the summer, depending upon what happens with the stay-home order for kindergarten roundup. So we'll be posting all of those changes when we know more. And then lastly, it's not actually on the report, but I just wanted to mention that Frank Walsh, our Meridian Township Supervisor, and his wife has graciously agreed to pay all the outstanding lunch debt for both Haslett and Okemos Public Schools. So thanks to Frank and his wife. I've actually gotten a couple calls from the media for comment on that, but we're very happy to have Frank as a part of our community and to contribute the balance and paying off the balance of those lunch accounts for both Haslett and for Okemos. So thanks to Frank and his wife. And that concludes my report.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you, Mr. Cook. And we'll extend our thanks to Mr. Walsh and his wife as well. That's exceedingly generous. So we'll move on to our discussion items. First one is just from your perspective, the impact of the governor's recent executive order suspending in-person instruction.
Yeah, so there's actually 2 discussion items, the EO and then the continuous learning plan. They're kind of intertwined together. So if anyone has a question, wants to make a comment, just kind of raise your hand and I'll stop talking, hopefully. If you have questions as to something that I've said thus far. Otherwise, I'll open it up for questions at the end. So the executive order, as most of us know, came out a little while ago on April 2nd. The executive order basically, as President Lemmer alluded to, suspended all in-person instruction for K-12 schools for the remainder of the school year. Part of that agreement also allows forgiveness of all the days that were not in person prior to that time. I believe there was around 13 days as a part of that. So not only is in-person instruction suspended, we are not required to make up any of the days at the end of the school year. So our school year was scheduled to end at the end of June, June 10th. And so we will not have any instruction beyond that date. So part of the plan also talks about a continuous learning plan, which I'll talk about in just a minute, but that plan has to be developed by the district. It has to be approved by the ISD and then forward on to the state for state approval. Part of the executive order also says that in order for school districts to continue to receive the full amount of state aid for funding throughout the rest of the year, that we have to continue to pay all employees in the school district. So subject to collective bargaining agreements and any caveats in the certain agreements. But at this point, we are planning on paying all of our employees the rest of the school year. And that includes our teachers, our custodians, our bus drivers, parapros, all of those members of all of our collective bargaining agreements, and our non-union workers, including our administrators and everyone else in the district. So we've been working over the last week or so to try to interpret our collective bargaining agreements. We've been working with our union presidents to determine exactly what that looks like. But I think we've come to consensus to make sure that all of our employees will be paid between now and the rest of the school year. So that's one of the pieces of the EO. In addition to that, she declares that the school district workers are considered essential employees. Any employee that's necessary to conduct the minimum basic school operation could potentially be called back to work. Most of our employees are going to be done digitally, but we do have a portion of our employees that has now returned back to work. Our food service employees have been back since we've continued on with our food service program and distributing meals over the last several weeks. In addition to that, our union custodian workers have now reported back to work to continue on cleaning the buildings and doing their daily operations. We also have our bus drivers that are back doing cleaning of their buses. All of our hourly employees are back when we're able to bring them back into the buildings. We are still required to follow essential screening procedures as proposed by Ingham County Health Department. So in order to be back in the buildings, all of our employees have to be screened. They have to answer 3 questions in order to be approved to come into the building, and that's being controlled at either the department level or the building level. We did open up the buildings to employees or to teachers last week for 3 days in order for them to get into the building to pick up any supplies or materials or consumables that they needed to start the continuous learning plan later on. So we're hoping at some point, depending upon how long the shutdown order continues, that we will allow possibly parents back into the building so that they can get anything that was left in students' lockers and so on and so forth. But we're holding off right now just because we want to make sure that people are safe. And in order to get back in the building, as I mentioned, they have to go through that screening process. So we want to make sure that we're continuing to keep our buildings safe. Some of the other highlights that in the order, we suspended all assessments for the rest of the school year, so there'll be no state testing. The SAT, which is generally given to the juniors in the spring, will now be given in the fall of 2020. So our students will have the ability to take the SAT. It just won't be until the fall of 2020. All evaluations for employees will be suspended for the rest of the year, including teachers and administrators. There are special provisions for special education students as a part of the executive order. We've been working with our legal counsel and such to try to figure out and navigate that piece. But essentially, we are now doing individual learning plans for all of our special ed students. So each special education students will have to have an individual learning plan, which is kind of an amendment to the current IEPs for all of those students. We have over 300. So that's quite a job for our special ed teachers to come up with all of those individual learning plans for all of our special ed students. So there's a lot of other things in the order. I won't go over a ton of that, but If you go to our COVID-19 webpage, it does lay out all of the communications that I've sent out over the last several weeks. It also has links to the executive order and all of the pertinent instructions and such as a part of the executive order that was issued by the governor on April 2nd. So that's pretty much the governor's executive order. I would open to any questions if anyone had with regard to the order itself. We'll talk about the continuous learning plan in just a minute and what that means for students moving forward. So any questions from board members? Comments? Lots happened in the last 3 weeks since we've met. So if I've missed anything, please ask questions if you have any.
Well, Steve, you mentioned that evaluations for teachers and administrators are no longer required, but we are contractually obligated to do an evaluation for you. So can you give us an update on any guidance you've received?
So essentially, because I have an individual agreement just like our administrators do, if that can't supersede the executive order, so if the board does want to continue to do an evaluation for my position, and if we want to do evaluations for administrators, we could continue to do that, or we could decide as a board to vote to suspend those for this year. So the challenge will be for my evaluation and for administrative evaluations, because we're no longer doing student growth assessments, that part of my evaluation and administrative evaluations include a student growth component, which we will not have the data for that. So if we want to do that, we'd have to come up with a different piece for that. So I've talked to our legal counsel, and they say basically that if we want to move forward with that, we can. It's really up to the board to decide not only how much, but what components would be a part of that evaluation. If we're going to do that, it would still have to be required to be done by the end of June. So if we suspended that and we wanted to do something different and have a different timeline, then the board would have to vote to decide what that looks like and how we move forward for my evaluation. So does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. And I think it'll give us something to think about. Speaking for myself, I think there's some value in conducting some form of evaluation. We may not use the Reeves matrix. We may not use the formal document that had been pre-approved. But I personally think I would like to see us do some sort of evaluation, even if it's not what we expected to be doing. And I'm not saying we do that by June, but I pose to my fellow members that thought of doing some level of evaluation as just a sort of a check-in review, even if it's not formal.
Any other questions with regard to the executive order?
Well, this is Karen. I was just going to reply to Tammy and say that perhaps Molly and Tammy and I can have a conversation and come up with some options that we can present to the other board members about if we proceed with an evaluation for the superintendent, what it might look like. And then perhaps as we have a committee meeting, we can talk further about what that could look like if we did something.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of that, and I think I saw Molly nodding as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's value in having a conversation each year, just kind of as part of the evaluation about strengths, weaknesses, and whether we do that in a form, kind of in the formal process we've used the last few years because of what's required by the state, or it's something that's a little bit more of however we would structure it. I think it'll be good just to at least have that conversation, especially since it has been such a full, unusual year.
Any other thoughts or comments? All right, so Mr. Cook, if you'd like to dive in a little deeper to our continuous learning plan.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to give a shout out to our administrative staff. Brandy's in the meeting here, Rich and Jeff. We've been really working tirelessly over the last several weeks and anticipating that this was going to come out. The governor didn't come out until April 2nd. So we've been working over the last several weeks to try to come up with some type of plan moving forward. We weren't really certain of the specifics until the actual order came out and laid out exactly what we had to do. But so I just thanks to all the administrators. They've been working on weekends and nights and everything to try to get this together so that we can meet the deadlines as proposed by the state. So the other thing I just wanted to point out, Jeff, if you want to just pull up real quickly, share your screen. We did, Jeff's staff did create a continuous learning webpage, which essentially lays out all of the continuous learning plans for all of the buildings. It talks about our grading policy. It talks about the resources that are out there for parents and technology support. So as I get into some of these specifics, as I talk about this, I just want to let you know that that page is out there, and it's a very, very good resource for parents to be able to find out where things are and how to get help if they need it in various different areas. So thanks to Jeff and his staff for putting that together. So everything links to the different plans. So if you pull up like the high school, Jeff, if you want to just pull that up real quick, it shows what their individual plan looks like in terms of the orientation week, the schedule, attendance, grading, all of those specifics for that particular building. And so, as I mentioned, the administrators, along with collaboration with some of our staff, teaching staff, put together what that plan looked like moving forward. Thankfully, there were a lot of associations and a lot of organizations outside that we did collaboration with, not only within our county, but within the state, to come up with some type of consistency as we put these plans together. So part of the requirements of the continuous learning plan is that, as I mentioned earlier, there's a template that was developed by the Department of Education. That template had to be filled out by individual districts and submitted to the ISD. I will report that we submitted our plan on last Friday, and I found out this morning that it was approved by the ISD. So we have not received our formal letter, but I did get verbal verification that our plan has been approved. The actual continuous learning plan that was submitted to the ISD is different than what you see on these different pages by school, because most of the plan that was submitted to the ISD was very general. So it basically had about 15 assurance questions that we had to answer, specifically talking about what we're going to do in particular areas. What are we going to do with technology? What are we going to do with the food program? What are we going to do with all different aspects of that? So as soon as I get the formal signed contract or contract from the ISD, we'll post it on the website. That's part of the requirement of the executive order, is that the plan that's approved by the ISD has to be posted there. So that's kind of the large level of the continuous learning plan. And then, as I mentioned, we developed those plans from within those parameters for each one of the schools. And it does look different each one of the schools. Obviously at kindergarten, the level of involvement will be less than it will be at the middle school and high school. It ranges anywhere from about an hour to 2 hours in length every single day. That's what the expectation is. And so, as I mentioned, each one of those learning plans are developed and printed there on this website. So I won't go into the individual plans themselves. So part of that plan lays out what students' expectations are for each one of the days of the 5 days of the week. So as you look at the high school, I believe this is the high school, isn't this, Jeff? Or is this the middle school? So first of all, I just want to talk about this week. So this first week is what we call an orientation week, which really just gives parents an opportunity and teachers to reconnect and get familiar with the remote learning platforms that we're using. We're essentially using both Google Classrooms and Seesaw. Those are the two main platforms. Seesaw is for elementary. Google is for secondary. In addition to that, we're offering training for both staff and for parents. And so there's tutorials available. Jeff and his staff put out some training videos out there that gets parents and students familiar with how to use most of these programs. I would say probably 80 to 90% of our teachers are already using some form of online platform to get information to students. But there's still a certain percentage of our population that does not have access to devices and this platform. So we're giving these training programs to parents and students so they can get familiar with that. In addition to that, as I mentioned, I think at the last board meeting, we spent the last couple weeks putting together a survey of parents and what technology they do have at home. So we've identified about 100 families district-wide that do not have a device at home, and we put together a program of distributing Chromebooks to all of those families. So Jeff and his staff over the last week or so have been handing out devices to all of those families that don't have them. I believe to this point, Jeff, and you can comment, I think we've handed out about 100 Chromebooks. We have about 20 or 30 families left that still have not responded. So we're going to be working over the next couple days during this orientation week to make sure that every single student in the district does have a device. So hopefully we'll be successful. If not, part of the plan also includes a paper supplemental. So if you don't have a device and you need to get the lessons and such, we will have a distribution once a week at each one of the buildings that parents can come and pick up those consumables that they need for those lessons. So we'll have a schedule once a week where they can just stop by and pick up those. If they want to have that in addition to the digital platform, they can also have that. But essentially that's for the families and students that don't have access to the devices and aren't able to get the information out there. So, so that's the orientation week. And then starting on the 20th, which is a week from today, we'll actually begin the actual plan where students will be expected to connect and follow the plan as we've laid out for each one of the students in each of the buildings. So in addition to the web page, all of the buildings sent out an individual letter to each one of the families in those buildings explaining exactly what that looks like and given resources and information if they have questions. As I mentioned, this first week here is orientation week. So this is all new for every one of us. It's new for teachers, it's new for students, it's new for parents. So we're trying to get parents set up in a routine moving forward, implementing the plan and getting used to working with their student on a daily basis to make sure that they're getting some form of new learning from now until the end of the year. So we are going to have a kind of a feedback component at the end of the first week to connect with parents to see if there are any questions or there are things that are working, things that are not working. So to give parents the opportunity to give us some feedback and also students to give feedback along the way. So as I mentioned, this is the first time we've ever done this, and so it's going to be a little rocky to get started, but we're hoping that it'll be successful. The expectation is not 100% learning from now until the end of the year. We're only going to be able to provide just a fraction of what we'd normally be able to provide in a face-to-face instructional setting, but our goal really is just new learning, and so that's really kind of what we're looking at between now and the end of the year, and that will be different at each and every one of the grade levels. So so that's a lot of information. Like I say, the website's out there, so I would be happy to entertain any questions if you have them. So Greg, go ahead.
At first thought, in the Michaud household, the program was received well by my daughter, so well done there to getting off to a good start there. But in your last few weeks in your discussions with the administrators, have you determined what the gap still might be here? Because obviously this schedule here isn't at the rigor that the normal school week would be at. So is there a gap in how is the school planning on trying to cover that prior to the next school year?
So at the elementary level, we're really trying to focus on the core essentials, math and reading at this point. And so social studies and science, unfortunately, probably will fall a little by the wayside. It's really going to be a challenge, and it's probably going to be more at the beginning of next year to identify what those gaps are. So we know what core areas that we're dealing with between now and the end of the year at elementary, and we're going to try to decide how we're going to fill that. Maybe something over the summer, but there'll probably have to be some type of review program as a part of starting the school next year and determining really students out. The problem is that, there's no testing component, so we really aren't able to assess until the fall really where students are at. So I think probably through the assessment programs that we give at the beginning of the school year, we'll be able to identify where those gaps are and hopefully have some resources available and ability for students to catch up. But we understand that's going to be a huge task at the beginning of next year. Brandy, I don't know if you want to comment at all on that. I'll put her on the spot here because she's a high school expert here.
So we know that there's going to be gaps, but I will tell you that when we collaborated with the teachers, we created this form with basically imagine a calendar for 8 weeks, right? And we asked them to identify the essential things that the kids would need to know for the rest of the year and to pick those things to work on, especially at the high school level. And so in a way that creates an artifact of this time that we're in, this weird time. So if next year we get to English 10 and our English 10 teachers are like, wait a minute, what exactly did you get? What exactly didn't you get? We have that artifact to go back to kind of know what our ninth grade teachers did teach or what our geometry teachers got to that maybe the algebra 2 teachers need to know. And we asked them to collaborate across grade level and across like subject area in the high school. So like all the biology teachers, all the geometry teachers kind of collaborated to pick those key essential skills for the last 8 weeks because we knew we were going to have to revisit that and figure out what they missed and what they got.
Brandy, was something
Did that
similar
answer your
done-
question?
Yep.
Sorry, I was going to ask, was something similar done like with the 8th grade teachers? So those students who are going to be
Ye-
moving from the middle school, you'll know what they were covering in those 8 weeks too?
Yep. The whole district used the kind of the same handout format. You know, they might have tweaked it a little at the elementary schools to fit them, but I know the secondaries used the same exact one to kind of help teachers shrink their thinking and transfer their plans to that document rather than their plan book they already had. That might have been like overwhelming to think about, oh, I'm not going to get to this and I'm not going to get to this, you know. We tried to like shrink it down and make it easier for them to follow and focus on essential things.
So we know that there are going to be students that are going to want to do more than the minimum. So we are offering resources, not as an expectation for all kids, but if there are some students that really want to kind of go further beyond what we're doing, we'll offer the resources and the information to do that. So if there are students that are in that category, that we're going to try to provide them the resources that we can, so that they can go beyond just the minimum that we're requiring.
And if I remember in reviewing the materials, it looked like the expectation on a day-to-day basis is approximately 1 to 2 hours of quote unquote instruction per day per student. I was personally surprised, especially for the secondary levels, that it wasn't a little bit higher. Can you talk through how you landed on 2 in particular for the high school?
Yeah. So we started working on that kind of I kept calling it the skeleton schedule that we put together. Following the state of Kansas and the state of Illinois canceled face-to-face instruction way before we did. So we kind of followed their guidance and and we really wanted to make sure we were focusing on the whole child, not just academic piece, because we don't know the situations each families are going to be in. We really wanted to try to make it equitable as best we could. So we fell right in the middle of the range, if that makes sense. Like we tried to look at all the different states that had like plans we thought were good, you know, and look at them and try to fall in the middle range, not something on the low end, but then again, not something that's going to have our kids stressed to the max right now. Because really, we've came out and said that our goals are maintaining relationships, simplicity, understanding, and flexibility. So that's kind of where we landed on with that 2 hours. Now we know there are going to be kids that want to do more, and teachers have plans in place for those kiddos, but we just wanted to make sure we were focusing on mental health, being safe, being healthy, and doing the best that you could with what you had.
So we did also collaborate with curriculum directors in the whole county. So the curriculum directors, as we kind of talked about this, tried to remain pretty consistent in terms of following what that expectation level in terms of time at every grade level was going to be. And also a lot of the associations in the state, the learning associations, kind of gave us some templates too of what they were recommending. So we just kind of gathered all that information and tried to figure out what would work best for our district. So that's kind of how it came out. You know, like I said, there's no real roadmap for this, so we tried to do the best we could.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate the fact that it acknowledges the difficult circumstances, the stress that individuals and families are experiencing, the fact that most parents are not professional educators. So it sounds like you're trying to make it manageable all the way around. So that's appreciated.
And
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
So
I just need
Greg,
to-
go ahead.
I just wanted to
Oh,
make
sorry.
sure, because I know I've had a couple of questions about what the expectations are versus what's required, or are there consequences if students aren't able to, work 1 or 2 hours a day, or if they don't check in for a week. Can you talk a little bit about how this relates to like progression to the next grade? Just because I've got questions. So I've had questions asked of me.
So basically the state says there's no expectation of, that basically if you've met all the requirements up to this point as of March 13th, that you would move forward. Okay. So at the high school, it's a little different. So, like seniors, in order to graduate, you have to show proficiency in all your classes as of March 13th. If you were failing any classes, then we had to give you the opportunity to make up so that you could meet those requirements for graduation. So the state's basically just saying as of March 13th, if you met all the expectations up to that point, you're going to move forward. So really, there's no testing per se from this point on, or no grading per se. It's really just trying to focus on as much learning as we can get between now and the end of the year, given this very, very uncharted waters of digital learning and so on and so forth. So, Brandy, I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah. So we cannot penalize students for their inability to participate in our continuous learning plan, whether it's paper packets or on the Chromebook. So at the high school, I know if a kid was, let's say you had a student that was failing of March 13th and they weren't able to get on, we would not issue them an E. We're going to issue them an I, which means that in the fall, when they're back in our building and safe and sound and we can see them, that we can work on a credit recovery with them to make up that that remainder of that credit. So going forward, like, for example, no student will get an E on their transcript for this semester. They'll get a G for credit granted, or an I. Now, the tricky part is, right, the seniors, the governor kind of declared them done. Kind of, right, in quotation marks. But I will say that I've had lots of seniors reach out because we have good kids, and they've said, Ms. Butcher, are we still getting out May 22nd? So they haven't quite realized that they could technically be done. So we are going to say, yep, March 22nd is your end date. That's what you're shooting for. Stay engaged. I've tried to stress with every senior, and I did a video today and sent it out, that we just want you to connect with us. We want you to stay engaged, and I list lots of reasons why that would be a good idea. So that's kind of where we're at. And as for the elementary schools, they're just going to give feedback like through Seesaw or through paper packets, and then kids are going to get promoted to the next grade. And then, like you asked about the gap, we'll just have to assess it then. And this isn't going to be like a 1-year thing. This is going to be like 2 or 3 years trying to make up this little bit of lost learning that we've had. But we're prepared to put a plan in place for that, for sure.
The other piece is the executive order does require us to evaluate how we've connected with every student. We have to monitor that. So basically, we're doing class lists every week to see, that you've connected with every student in your class every single week. If you can't, you can't. We'll try to do what we can to connect, but we're required to make sure that we monitor the progress of every student between now and the end of the year, whether it's little, whether it's none, whether it's a lot, whatever that looks like. So we are keeping track so that we can keep an eye on every student.
Right. Thank you.
So Greg, you had a question?
Yeah, so Brandon, when you're talking about the mental wellness of your students and looking outside the curriculum, and that begs to ask the question here, because I get it asked often here, is on these activities that are important to these seniors, such as the prom and commencement. I know that some school districts seem to be committing to those at a much later date. There's middle, late summer. Has Haslett had any discussions on those activities? And using school resources for those?
So I think the next phase of this whole thing will be to start to look at. So I talked to administrators this morning and said we needed to get the CLP in place. Now that we have this learning plan in place, we'll start looking at all those additional things that happen between now and the end of the year and how we potentially can provide something for those activities, whether it's prom, whether it's recognition night, senior night, all of those things. We're going to have to put something together. So hopefully in the next week or two, we'll start looking at what all those activities are and how we can plan for something, whether it's if we can do something before the end of the school year or it's in the summer or what that looks like. So we don't really have all the answers yet, but hopefully now that we got the plan in place and approved,
Perfect.
we can start focusing on some of those other ancillary programs that are out there. So Brandy, I don't know if you wanted to.
Nope, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Perfect.
We've definitely started working on it and brainstorming. We just don't like, it's kind of hard because we don't know what the executive order is going to say and when it's going to be lifted, and then if it is lifted, how many people we can have together at one time. So those are all the things that I've tried to hold our reservations for all those kinds of events the best I could, but then the venues start canceling on me and I don't really have a choice, right? So we're trying. We're holding out as long as we can on those things.
Okay.
And Steve, just similarly, I know like they had started all the band petting zoos and all of that with the 5th graders to go into 6th grade, and we're trying to figure out the scheduling. I assumed the plans for that are still to be figured out too. Some of those transitionary. Okay.
Correct. That's what I told administrators we met this morning. I basically said we need to now start focusing on at all grade levels. What are those additional things between now and the end of the year that students may miss that we potentially either can make up or plan for sometime in the future so that they still have that opportunity for those events.
Well, Steve, as a band parent in the high school building, I know that the band is working on ways to kind of redo the petting school for 5th graders. One of the things that the high school band students may well be doing is recording some videos with their instruments in these first couple of weeks so that they can share those with the 5th grade students again and work on that process, because there are many things related to the band program that are coming that usually happen this time of year. So there is a lot that they're working on. I know the band directors are working on it with the band parents to try to help support what it is that they all need to do. But I also have 2 seniors, so I'm very interested in what we're going to do for them. I have a college senior who has been stripped of all senior year events.
I have one too.
Yeah, and they're even talking about inviting them back for commencement next year. I don't know how that happens, but I guess one of the questions I had really though about outreach to our students is I'm a little concerned about those students who they might not contact you for several weeks. And what is our obligation or our responsibility to find other ways to reach out to them? I mean, we may not have as many students who are in grave difficulty as other districts, but I expect we will have some number. And what if we have a student that we don't see for 2-3 weeks online or 4 weeks online?
So I think that's something as an administrative team we're going to have to address once we get there. I mean, I think we've been trying to contact every single student at every single level right now, and I don't think there's a ton that we haven't contacted. And so I will tell you that, and a good indication of that is some of those at-risk students that picking up devices. In the beginning, we thought we weren't going to really have as many show up, but I think, Jeff, I think there's only like, 20 some families left. So of the over 100 that we considered at risk and needed devices have come by and pick up devices. So hopefully that's an indication that some of those students that we had concerns about will eventually engage and connect with us.
And I can tell you out of the 866 kids at the high school, I have about 5 left that I haven't heard from about internet access or computers. And today I eventually just reached out to the kids through their own personal school email rather than trying to get their parents to text me back. And I got them to answer me in their school email. So that's a promising sign that there's only about 5 left that I haven't heard from altogether.
That makes me wonder, of course, some of you know some of the hats that I wear, but are there plans or have we gotten guidance either from MDE or the ISD for doing any additional follow-up if we really can't reach somebody or there is a concern? Because obviously school can and should be a safe place, and unfortunately sometimes it's safer than being at home. So that brings up concerns when we aren't both academically and engaged with them, but for other reasons as well.
Well, I talked to Chief Balaga, and they're willing to use our resource officer if we need to. If there are some families that we just can't get a hold of, there's nothing that they would make a house visit and that we could potentially try to make that connection. Not that there's a problem, but at least to use that resource to reach out to some of those families that we're just not able to contact with. And they've been very, very helpful in giving that assistance in terms of reaching out if we need to. So hopefully that will be our last resort. But if we need to, then we can have one of our local law enforcement agencies reach out to those families by personal visit.
Well, a question, this may be too specific, but it impacts not just the seniors, but I would imagine particularly seniors. AP classes, have their requirements been shifted, or because that's college level? I'm curious how that's being handled.
So the College Board actually has been pretty ahead of the curve on this, and they've already altered the AP tests to cover 3/4 of the material versus 4/4, the whole thing. And they've changed the exam from being at school in person, like multiple choice short answer, to just short answer, one that could be taken at home. So our counselor, Mr. Lepper, has been working with those, and actually I have an email that I'm sending out tomorrow just to AP classes about that and that option. So those things will still be there and they'll still be available. Now, how the colleges receive that score is going to be up to the individual colleges. We don't have much say over that, but it sounds promising that they'll be accepting them.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Not really a question, but I just want to thank all of you who are in this meeting. I know it's been a ton of work, and I have been really impressed by, my N of 3 and what I've seen with my kids and their teachers. And, they're kind of excited, they've enjoyed having a little bit of a break. So, but I think for the most part, they're all excited to be able to do some of these activities. I know they're all excited to engage again with their teachers and some of their classmates. And it's been fun watching them learn how to use things like Zoom and how to use the technology in different ways. And so we're trying to spin this as a big learning experience for everybody, I know, at our home. So I just want to thank everybody, because I know trying to figure out how to do one class online for just a few weeks and for college students, how much work it is. So I can't imagine the hours that you've all been putting in. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody.
And I also wanted to echo my thanks and appreciation. I have connections with different school districts, again, with some of the different hats that I have and my family members. And I am so proud of our district, because I feel like we were so far ahead of other districts, even in the county. And, you knew this was coming. You were anticipating what might have to be done. You were asking questions. You were connecting with your staff very early in the process. And the fact that you have your plan not only submitted and approved by the ISD, that is a true testament to how much work you put into it before the executive order came out. So thank you all very, very much for being on top of things.
While I can, I want to give a shout out. He hates this, but I want to give a shout out to Jeff for all the work the technology's done, and that really every single part of what we're doing involves technology, and it's probably 10 times the norm at this point in terms of getting devices and getting everybody logged in and training. And when they only have four staff members over technology, it's really been a huge uphill battle for technology. But Jeff has just worked tirelessly, and his staff, making sure that everyone has what they need, and that he's been super responsive. That's the other thing, is that, you know, we take for granted that these technology things just happen. Well, they don't. As we all know, when we try to plug in something or we try to do something new, it doesn't work. And we have, you know, 2,700 kids and 250 employees, and everybody wants something tomorrow. It is very challenging. So Jeff, thanks to you and your staff for really you know, going the extra mile to make that happen.
Yeah, thank you. But it takes a village, and everybody's pitched in, and I appreciate that. And you know, we'll do the best we can. So thanks, Steve.
Well, another piece of our readiness, I think, is the work we've been doing over the last several years. You, Jeff, Margie's work, preparing our teachers and looking at different types of learning and teaching methodologies and tools. So again, we were prepping our teachers before we even knew that this was going to be a need or like a real formal need, I guess. We know that teaching is moving in that direction, but again, another example of we were ahead of the curve in getting our teachers familiar with some of these various technologies.
Well, I'll just say one thing very quickly. I mean, traditionally for, you know, at least the last 6, 7, 8 years, even more, the board has always been supportive of technology, and that includes the current board members. And so, you know, having somebody like Margie on board to train the staff has been very important and has moved us ahead. So I'm just very fortunate, and I think we all are, to have a board so supportive of technology. And, you know, I really think that that's what's led to us being where we are today, as well as all the other people who have been involved. So, like I said, it takes a village.
Steve, one question not really with the continuous learning plan, but Brandy brought up kind of that concern about our students' mental health and wellness too. Are we also doing anything with our teachers and our other staff, just checking in with them and seeing how everybody's doing during this time?
We are, and that was one of the things early on that I emphasized with staff, is that as we started to have some meetings with buildings, is to say, you know, you have to look out for yourself. You have to make sure you take time for yourself. You have time for your family. That, you know, this isn't all 150 miles an hour go, you know. So I think they heard that message. You know, thankfully we have a really great mental health component to our district. All of our ancillary staff, our social workers, our counselors, you know, they've met and they've really tried to come up with some solutions, or at least some things that staff could do, resources and such. And so we've also, the state's been pretty good about putting resources out there too, of what that looks like for certain members of our staff. So we do have that component on our website also, that if there are resources out there where people can go to find help if they need it. So part of it's just establishing a routine. As you know, this is just being home all day with your students. That's enough, let alone having to do all the other things that everybody has to do. So we're just very fortunate to have staff that's supportive and able to provide those resources when needed. So. Any other questions on the CLP?
Okay, well, we can, if I'm seeing and hearing no additional questions, we'll move on to the next portion of our agenda, which we should move through quickly, I would think. We have board reports, and to my knowledge, to my memory, we have not had a finance facilities committee meeting or a policy personnel committee meeting. Is that correct? So we should have no reports?
That's correct.
Okay, so then we'll move on to items from board members. And I'll just echo and want to make sure that the minutes reflect all of our appreciation for, again, the pre-planning that got us ready for the continuous learning plan, as well as even before that, the work that's been done to promote and strengthen the use of technology within our district.
Tammy, I wanted to report to the board on 2 student trips that the board had previously approved, and let people know the status of those trips and how it was handled. So the first one is the choir was going to take their trip to New York City that they do every 2 years. Juniors and seniors are invited to go on the trip, and it's the choir directors organize it, and they work with Bright Spark Travel Company to arrange that. And that trip, of course, has been canceled. It was to happen the first weekend of May. And the choir directors were in full communication with the families who were going on the trip through this whole time. And they had worked, negotiated a plan with Bright Spark so that families will not lose any money at all on this trip. And the only thing that Bright Spark is going to be paid is the $149 cost of trip insurance. And the Choir Boosters has stepped in and is paying that cost for every family, every student that was going on the trip. And they are even paying it for those families that had not previously purchased the insurance. So all families will be fully refunded what they had paid for the trip to Bright Spark. The second trip is the trip that Mrs. Warrow and Miss Snook organized to the Galapagos Islands. That was supposed to depart on June 17th. And they are working with EF Tours, and they have had extensive conversations with EF Tours about how to handle this. And so what has happened is that that trip is being postponed to the summer of 2021 with no extra costs for the students who had signed on for that trip. But the families, the students were also given additional options. They can simply stay with the trip at no additional cost to them. They can receive a voucher for the full amount that they had paid for another trip that they could go on, or they could cancel their trip membership for a refund. And EF Tours made that option based on the policies and the costs that would have been in place if the trip had been canceled in February. So in the end, families who chose to cancel participation in the trip will only lose $760, which is a $500 cancellation fee, and then the other amount is the insurance cost and a couple of other things. But seniors were given the option to handle the trip however they chose, because typically these trips are only for current students or students who have just graduated. But I want to say that Ms. Warrer and Ms. Snook were on top of everything. They had extensive conversations with EF Tours. My sons were scheduled to go on the trip, and I had conversations with EF Tours. EF Tours is spot on. They were very professional, and everything that Ms. Snook and Ms. Warrow communicated to us is exactly what the representative that I called on the phone who communicated with us. So, you know, rest assured that on both of those kinds of trips, our staff handled it very professionally. The tour companies were very professional, and it was all handled with the best interests of our students and our families, I think, in mind.
Thank you for that update. It's, again, to add to the list of disappointments for our students and others this spring. But I'm glad in some cases, at least for the Galapagos trip, there may still be that opportunity. other board member reports? Or items from board members, I should say? I'm neither seeing nor hearing anything additional, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. I'll need a motion. We have item number 1, approval of our March 23rd minutes, which was our first virtual board meeting. And then item number 2, approval of the remaining construction bids, which were attachment A in our board packets. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the consent? Well, first of all, excuse me, if anyone wants any of those items pulled, please let me know. I'm not seeing or hearing anything, so I will entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda, please.
I move that we accept the consent agenda.
And that sounded like Josh.
Correct?
Great, thank you. I don't have all the windows up for some reason. And do we have a second?
I was gonna say, this is Molly and I second.
Great, thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, let me just do a roll call because it'll be easier for me to track and for Michelle to track. Ms. East,
Yes?
Ms. Palvarento,
Yes.
Mr. Maury,
Yes.
Ms. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Michaud,
Yes.
and Ms. Wheeler.
Yes.
Okay, and I will vote aye as well. So that motion carries. I will move on to announcements. First is that we do have a Policy Personnel Committee virtual meeting being held on April 20th at 7:30 a.m. A Finance and Facilities Committee meeting will be held virtually on April 24th at 7:30 a.m. And our next regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting will be a virtual meeting. It's on April 27th, so we're still within our stay-at-home executive order. That will be at 7 p.m. as well. I have no additional items for the agenda, so I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. No one wants to go home?
Yeah.
We're home.
I move we adjourn.
Okay, Tammy moves to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Greg. Thank you. Let's see. I'll go in reverse order. Ms. Wheeler,
Yes.
Mr. Michaud,
Yes.
Ms. Collins. That was a yes from Tracy.
Yes.
Mr. Maury,
Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Palvarento,
Yes.
and Ms. East,
Yes.
and Ms. Lemmer votes yes as well. That is all for the evening. The motion passes. We are adjourned. Have a good evening, everybody.